Women in Canada face violence and sexual violence every day, on the job, at home, in the streets. That can be an unspeakable challenge for all women. And for immigrant women, it can be simply too much to handle alone. That's where a new graphic novel comes in. It's called Telling Our Stories, Immigrant Women's Resilience, and it brings two of the women responsible for making it happen to our studio tonight to tell us more. Kiwanuka Ghosh, a senior coordinator at advocacy, the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, and Mona Bakat, a volunteer at MOFIF, an Ontario agency assisting Francophone immigrant women. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
When I think of graphic novels, I think of comic books. Kiwanuka, why tell the stories of women who've been assaulted through the medium of a graphic novel?
When we started this project, we had the opportunity to, this is a part of a larger project that advocacy is working with MOFIF, which is the Movement Ontarien des Immigrants de Francophone, and it's a partnership. And when we started the project, we thought about creating a graphic novel because it is a really accessible way to discuss these issues. By accessible, I mean that these are difficult topics to talk about. So if we had written like stories only, and those things have been done, and we wanted it to be a way that community members would actually read this graphic novel, engage with each other, and also be a part of the process. And in the recent past, graphic novels have been used in such as Priya's Shakti, which is a graphic novel written in India to talk about sexual violence. More close to home, we have a graphic novel that was written by the Pomegranate Tree Collective of Barbara Schleifer Clinic here in Toronto, where young Muslim women wrote their stories, and it included different mediums, poetry as well as graphic novels. Through this graphic novel, we actually worked with adult immigrant women, and it is a way to discuss these very difficult topics in a manner that is engaging. It is also, graphic novels are not just for children. I read them. Like, for example, there's Miss Marvel. She's a new superhero. She's also a young Muslim Pakistani woman. You know, so times are changing from the Superman, Batman genre to, you know, stories that reflect who we are as women of color and immigrant and refugee women. We also thought that talking about sexual violence and harassment is really important at this day and age in the rape culture that we are living in. It impacts everybody, not just immigrant and refugee women. So
that's very important to mention. And Mona, you were involved in this project.
I got involved with the project, so I was volunteering with MOFIF. So we had a workshop with Faiza Abdullawi, who is the president of MOFIF. So she talked about the project, and I felt that that was my calling. So I always wanted to do that kind of project. So and then when we started working on that project, it was a 4-week. So it was a 4 days workshop. So I didn't think that it reached that point to, like, I'm very happy, I'm very proud of that graphic novel. So I hope that all the immigrant women here in Canada can benefit from that book, and I think every woman can relate to that book. So yeah, so I'm very proud of that project. So
and the novel features 4 stories.
Yeah, 4 stories.
Whose stories are these?
So our story was Magali's stories. So it was about a Francophone woman who struggled with abuse at the workplace. So she couldn't make her decision because she couldn't make a decision because she was isolated. So she didn't have anyone to help her to pass through or to make a decision. So with Magali's stories, so we elaborated a lot of solutions to that particular situations. So we ended up the stories with an open-ended question. So we gave a lot of solutions. So it's up to the woman who is facing that.
It gives them kind of resources.
And
that's at the end of the novel. And the novel comes in, like you said, 11 languages. To help us understand the issue of sexual assault better, let's look at some numbers. Every 6 days, a woman is killed by her partner in Canada. Half of all women in Canada have experienced at least one incident of physical or sexual violence since the age of 16. 7 in 10 people who experience family violence are women and girls. And when it comes to newcomers, according to a report prepared for the federal government, research to date on immigrant and refugee women in Canada has tended to focus more broadly on the subject of domestic or IPV, intimate partner violence, rather than sexual violence. Research on IPV suggests that patriarchal values among some ethnic and cultural groups can lead to higher incidence of gender-based violence and a greater likelihood that the violence will not be reported as compared to the rest of the Canadian population. Kritika, how is the experience of women who are new to the country different from other Canadian women?
I'll go into that in a minute, but just to reflect on the statistics that you mentioned, just want to clarify that, when we talk about certain communities having patriarchal values, all communities have patriarchal values regardless of where people are from, because we are living in a very patriarchal society. I look at the US with their president, Donald Trump, just because if the person in the highest authority can be abusive, sexually abusive towards women and still get to this position of power despite that, that is telling about society, and that is in the quote-unquote West. So I don't want to clarify that it's not just, women from immigrant refugee communities, it is reflected in different manners. So in terms of your question about the how is it different or what are the barriers, is that right? So there are many barriers that immigrant refugee women face that could be both community-based, it could be institutional, it could be systemic. So and it could also be barriers that they face when they go out to reach out for support. So one of the most common one is that lack of services that are linguistically available for women in their language or appropriate to their background. Many agencies do offer services, but even if I, for example, speak the language or I'm from that community, I may not be trained to respond to a woman who has been experienced sexual violence. So lack of staff that have been trained or informed, including trauma-informed training, and also lack of services in different languages. There is this expectation that immigrant women should come here and quote-unquote assimilate immediately and either speak English or French, and that is not realistic. And we need to offer services and information in the language that the survivor speaks, because otherwise it'll isolate women even further. There are also in general, and this is true for not just immigrant refugee women, but immigrant and refugee women face the fear of not being believed or supported. And that happens, in our communities and the families. And even when we see, for example, the women coming forward in the Gian Gomeshi trial, it was like they were on trial. So when you have immigrant and refugee women who have the added barrier of immigration status, language, being in isolation, and we ask the question, why didn't she come forward earlier and talk about this experience of sexual violence that she experienced 5 years ago? It's because of all of these, Also systemically, although laws are changing for the better right now, even in Canada, where we think, it's such a safe haven for people, for women, for example, there is the conditional permanent residency law, under which is getting repealed mercifully, but under which women, or actually it's for both men and women, but it impacts survivors of violence who are mainly women for the most part, where you have to be let's say you're getting sponsored by your spouse, you have to stay in the marriage and remain physically in the relationship and in the at home together for 2 years before you can leave. And
so people are afraid that if they do say something, there's a possibility of being deported.
They lose their status.
And also refugee women and have lesser access to healthcare, for example.
Why is that?
Because that is the way. Because refugees don't have full access to healthcare.
Even Ontario.
Yeah, till last year actually, there was this federal healthcare system that actually had been was repealed, and so the refugee men and women did not have full access to healthcare under the laws that the previous government had passed, and that was just recently repealed. But even under that, for example, many survivors will need access to counseling or
I was going to bring that up because earlier on you mentioned isolation.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I'm thinking it probably would impact someone's mental health.
absolutely.
Are there services at
There
all?
are services, but again, they may not always have the linguistic capacity, and they're very far and few in between. And there is very few services that are actually free for survivors of violence. And counseling on a private basis is quite expensive. So there needs to be more services that are available for immigrant refugee women.
Mona, you came to Canada in 2014 from
Yes,
Algeria.
that's correct.
What was it like for you when you first arrived here?
So I came here in 2014, like you mentioned, with my husband and my little daughter. She's 5 now. I'm very proud of her. So it was like still it's a struggle to settle down here. So it's very hard for us as immigrants to not just cope with the culture. So specifically to find a job. So always we are like we are faced with Canadian experience. So
You are a lawyer in Algeria.
I am a lawyer in Algeria, and then I had just completed an immigration consultant program. So I'm very familiar with the issue that the immigrants go through. So specifically, like Kritika said, about the conditional PR. So for 2 years, yeah. So so I was faced with a reality check. So I had to start from scratch, even though so I have to forget about my education back home in Algeria. So. Yeah, so we have to start from scratch, which is very hard for us. So we have to provide for our daughter. So we have to study meanwhile work. So that's very hard. Like that was very hard. Like I said, I'm very concerned about the immigrants here and how to survive, how to cope, how to settle down here. So that's why I enrolled in that program. So
and having participated in the program,
yeah.
what did you learn from the women in the workshops?
So each one, we were 6 women, amazing women. We are friends now. So so each woman came from different culture. We brought up our experiences, our stories. So it was amazing. So the first days of the workshop, the 2 days, we were just playing games to just get
familiar with each other.
So that was an amazing experience. And then in the course of these two days, we wrote the story, which is Magali's story. Magali's story. It's written in French.
I'd like to show a part of the novel from the comic. And this story was about workplace harassment. Why was it important to include a story about workplace harassment?
I think it's very common, and then that it's very common, so we have to speak out. I think every woman at one point faced sexual harassment. It's subtle. So Magali was very confused because her boss was trying to. So he had some inappropriate behavior with her, but she couldn't recognize the sign. So she didn't know if it's an abuse or not. So
with help from friends, she managed to get out of.
She had her friends here in Canada. So she spoke with them, and then at the end she knew what to do. So I think every woman can relate to Magali's story. So at one point,
And having heard being around the women, Kritika, what did you learn from them?
I learned that women are very resilient. I mean, we are women, but I think that women, immigrant women, refugee women's experiences vary. We're not all the same, obviously, and we have various different experiences. And I realized that there's an intersectionality to our lived experiences. So in terms of, experiences around racism, as well as homophobia and sexual harassment, and that it takes a lot. It's very courageous of all the women that participated in this to share their personal experiences, also to open up, and that violence is occurring all around us. Just to give you a snippet, I was telling Mona on the way here that yesterday I was just shopping in a nearby store to get something, and we talked about what I was working on, and I said we've created this graphic novel, and the young woman I was talking to said, is it just about rape? Because this notion of sexual violence is rape, that's the most common notion. And I said, no, it's about different experiences, and I said, including workplace harassment. And she's like, I was harassed at work. And then she opened up about her experience, and then she I said, I know I shouldn't think this way, but I blame myself. And that is also what society has tells us to do, that it's the woman's and the survivor's fault in some way to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, to say something wrong, to why was she out so late, all this victim blaming. So we wanted to change that conversation. And we were able to do that through these stories and by also these workshops where the women recognized that no, it was not their fault, all the different forms of abuse that they experienced, and that many women were there as just, community members, and they were like, how can we support each other? So if you notice all of the stories, we have examples of how a friend, a community member, or somebody can actually support the survivor, and not just go to the police, for example, because for many community members, going to the police is not safe, especially let's say if you're a person with precarious status, where we don't have a don't ask, don't tell kind of, we don't have a access without fear policy here in the province, or on a federal level.
Do you think that would help?
Oh, that is so necessary to have a access without fear policy if you really want immigrant and refugee women to not feel afraid of reporting, because especially if they're with precarious status, and that is also includes them going to access services in general. Many women do not go out and report because of fear that their children will be taken away from them, that they will be deported back to their country of origin, and also not knowing their rights. And it's not just their own unfounded fear, it's also because many of them have experienced further violence and abuse when they go to report. So
I mean, this sense of isolation and being alone just grows and grows and grows. You're a double migrant, Kritika. You are from India by way of the US.
Yeah.
What was it like for you when you moved here?
It was very similar to what Mona was saying. I moved here for personal reasons, and I had to start all over again. And I had lived in New York City for 20 years. So from high school onwards, I did 9th grade onwards, and I worked there for 10 years in the nonprofit sector. I have a master's degree from the UK. And over here, none of that mattered. I had to start off doing minimum wage jobs. I then shifted to having 3-month contracts, then a 6-month contract, and then finally I'm here where I am. And I also come with lots of privileges, being able to speak English fluently, having a U.S. passport. So I understand that I can only imagine what immigrant women without, who are coming here, dependent on their spouse, or not having the language access, or facing Islamophobia, what they must be facing, because it is something that, especially if you're a racialized woman, it is. You're an immigrant woman, you're facing multiple forms of barriers, regardless of where you're coming from. So at this point in my life, when I am at a more stable place, I always get emails from women who are like, I've just moved here from XYZ country, I want to work in this sector, I don't know what to do. And I will meet them for a coffee and talk to them and give them it's all about networking and who you know. Unfortunately, you could have been the big shot in your country of origin, doesn't matter here. So it's about beginning again. It's like you have to prove yourself. This country doesn't just accept you as you are. It's like, okay, you studied here, so what is your Canadian experience? What's your education? And so you have, it's like it's challenging.
Harder. Yeah, you work harder. I'm surprised because you were a lawyer. When you moved here, what did you expect?
It was like, before coming here, we just came for a visit, so I really loved Canada. So Toronto, I was eager to start new life here. So
but you didn't expect that you would have to start.
So once I was expecting, I expected that I will suffer, I will struggle to find a job, but not at that extent. So it's harder for us to find a job here. Like Kritika said, Canadian experience, if they don't give us the chance to work, so how can we get the Canadian experience? So for us as immigrants, we have to work harder and harder to prove ourselves that we deserve that job. And the thing that about the Canadian experience, so for like Magali's story, she just came in and that was her first job in Canada. So she needed that job. She couldn't quit. So she was put in a situation she cannot make a decision because she needs that job. If she quit, so the result will be like maybe she will not find another job. So she was wondering should I stay, because I need this job. I need to provide for myself. This is my first job in Canada. So how can I do? I got this chance. I won't just
I don't want to throw it away.
Exactly. So that was a very hard decision for her. I think this is a hard decision for an immigrant, like more harder than, like more than a Canadian, because as a Canadian woman, she already has connection, has her families, she knows how to go through this period. So, but for Magali, she was isolated, she was by herself. So she has, and she needed that job. They gave her the chance to work, so she cannot just quit that easy. So she was fighting harder to stick to that job, even though she faced inappropriate behavior from her boss. She said, "Okay, I will persist. I will just close my eyes, and then maybe I will just everything will be okay. So I don't want to this hassle. So I will just want to keep my job. That's my priority." So for us, I know, like as an immigrant, even though you are educated, I'm not sure why this stereotype like about immigrants. I don't know they are not educated. No, we are. We had a life. So we came here for a better life. Yes. So I'm thinking of my daughter. So now as like being part of that job, I know. I know my daughter will be proud of me because it takes like a small efforts to make a big difference. So it starts from us. So I'm working hard to secure a better life for her. I don't want her to go through all the hassle that I went through. So including street harassment in the street, which is not here. So harassment in the street is it's a big problem for us as women. So it's very emotionally tiring. So it breaks your self-esteem as a woman. So like maybe if like some people they think that it doesn't matter, just don't listen. No, you can. So it breaks your self-esteem. I don't want to listen. I don't want to be harassed. I want to live as a human being. Like I am a human being. I deserve respect. So whatever I'm wearing, whatever my behavior, whatever. So it's my private life. So don't get like it's not your business. So this is the line. So my respect, I just deserve respect as a woman. So I'm working very hard. So I was interested in that to participate in that project. So I'm always thinking of the future. So we are working now to secure a better future for our little girls. So I hope in the future they will not that kind of problems that won't exist anymore. So just the equity between two genders, no abuse, no. So we have to accept difference, the other. Maybe if it's homosexual, it's a girl, whatever, racial, ethnic, ethical. So ethnicity. So we have to accept the others
and respect each other.
Yeah, no matter what. If you are a woman or a man, or So that's And I'm hoping for that.
Me too.
A better future
I think we all
girls.
are. Kiwanuka, what do you hope the graphic novel will do?
I hope that the graphic novel will continue the conversations that some of us or all of us are hopefully having in our homes and with our friends, in our communities around sexual violence, but also how are we raising our children, in terms of are we expecting girls to come home at a certain time and allow their brothers to come home whenever after soccer practice? What are the messages we are sending to the people in our lives and the young people in particular? But also that sexual violence takes different forms, and because sometimes people think, like I said, that sexual violence is only, for example, rape, but it's not. It takes in the stories that we share, we show that there is marital rape, for example. There's workplace harassment. There is harassment in the school, in the public and private domains. It's everywhere, and that we all know it exists. Now what? We hope that the graphic novel will be a tool to start these conversations. There are discussion questions in there that people can use. We're hoping that, for example, OCASI has 200 member agencies that are working in immigrant and refugee communities, and we're hoping that many of them will use the graphic novel in their classes and their workshops with not just women and youth, but even men, because you can't just educate one group of people and not the others. We want to talk to the men and be like, oh, how would you talk to fellow men about this, and how can this be a conversation starter? How would you respond if this happened to your friend or a family member? How would you support her, we hope that it's a tool to start these conversations, continue these conversations, and also dismantle stereotypes. Because we show that yes, immigrant and refugee women experience violence, but they're also there to support each other. They're there to challenge the systems of oppression. It's not just about being victims. It is about creating a movement together, and also just being able to, I hope that eventually in this lifetime, maybe I will not have to do this kind of work, because that's all that people who do VAW or sexual violence work hope for. But the biggest challenge is actually changing perceptions and thoughts and ideologies, because once you change that, then you're changing the actions as well.
Can you do that in policy? Why not?
Absolutely, we could do that in policy, and that is happening through the Sexual Violence Action Plan. So, for example, Cassie is one of the members of the Violence Against Women, the Provincial Roundtable, which meets regularly to discuss the action plan that came out 2 years ago and its implementation. And since then, we've had plans come out around anti-trafficking initiatives and other initiatives that have come out through the action plan and that impact women of all backgrounds, including immigrants and refugees. So for the policy, I think one of the biggest ones that we discussed is to change the federal policy around and have an access without fear policy that would really not just impact women going through violence, but other folks, for example, going through workplace employment harassment, even men who are, or people who are migrant workers, for example, experiencing violence in their workplace who don't report it because they're afraid of deportation. So, but changing this one particular law would be really important in allowing immigrant refugee people to report violence, both in terms of sexual violence as well as other forms of violence they're experiencing. So we hope that this will be something that people start advocating for. Ocasi has already started doing that work. So, if people are interested in knowing how to be a part of that, they're welcome to connect with us.
Thank you so much for being here, Kritika and
Thank you.
Mona.
Thank you.
Thank you for understanding this
hosting.
issue more and for presenting the graphic novel.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.